Okay, so I think it is officially 2 p.m. We have about 40 participants. Excellent. So today, what I want to do is, first of all, just quickly kind of tell you up. So today being Wednesday, once again, like I mentioned a little bit before, if you just got here, you should already have 2 assignments done. You should have your genetic linkage coloring and kind of fill in the blank. That should be done. And your genetic linkage protocol, that should also be done as well. If you are joining the meeting, make sure that you mute your audio so we don't hear any feedback or hear anything that might be going all around in your background. So once again, those are 2 assignments hopefully you'll have done. Once again, I'll talk about how exactly you'll be turning in this and tomorrow. So starting today, you should now be focusing more on evolution. Evolution, Darwin, natural selection, and that's what I want to talk about right now. Before we get into that discussion, guys, make sure you're checking it Moto daily. I put the agendas on there. I put important links as on there as well. For example, I'm not sure if you're aware, but if you did go to Edmodo, guys, there are free AP Biology review sessions that are happening. And for AP Biology, there's one today at 4 p.m. I put the link on Edmodo. It's a YouTube review session. And actually, it's kind of cool because their session is going to be over natural selection and introduction to natural selection. So that's definitely something that you want to check out, especially if you signed up to take the exam. So once again, that's 4 p.m. and they start today. I put the entire schedule. They have one today. They have Thursday and Friday, also around 4 p.m., kind of all dealing with evolution, natural selection, Darwin, artificial selection, and so forth. So make sure that you check that out, guys. And once again, make sure you continue to check your Edmodo and your Instagram if you're on the Instagram page as well. Okay, so at this time, I'm going to start sharing with you what I want to go over today. So today, we are going to talk about evolution. So hopefully, do you guys see the PowerPoint that I am sharing with you? Excellent. Now, guys, make sure that you mute yourself so we don't hear any of your background noise that you might be having. And then you can unmute yourself when I ask you guys a question, or maybe when or you have a question, you can unmute yourself and kind of ask it. Okay, so when it comes to evolution, this is chapter 22 in your book. Guys, there's pretty much one person that we focus on. And that person is who I like to refer to as the man of the plan, the man with the plan. And that is, of course, I think many of you know, Darwin. And wait, that's weird. That's my son, Darwin, but that's not Darwin. We want Charles Darwin. So Charles Darwin, that's the man with the plan, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So kind of the first thing I want to ask, guys, in your head, like, what is your definition of evolution? Like, when you hear evolution, what do you guys usually think of? So usually, a lot of people usually think of dinosaurs, or they think of, they think of monkeys for some reason. They think of natural selection. But when it comes to the definition pretty much, I think most of you pretty much have down, it's very simply just change over time. That's what it is, change over time. And guys, when it comes to evolution, we can't deny evolution. I mean, you could deny it, but it would be silly because everything changes over time. You change over time. I mean, look at you. You started off as a single cell, a zygote, and look at you now, over 1 trillion cells. You've been growing your entire life. You've been evolving. And guys, pretty much everything changes. If we look at phones, guys, phones have been evolving as well. Guys, the original, we could say the ancestral species of phones was this phone right here that was originally called the brick because it actually weighed about a brick. It pretty much covered half of your face. But guys, this is just starting from 2000 to just 2014. So I mean, we're not even up to date, and you've seen how the phones have changed. Notice pretty much we don't even have any flip phones. Actually, I saw a flip phone the other day. My mom was using a flip phone, and I was like, what is that dinosaur you're using? But it's something she feels comfortable with. So When it comes to evolution, we're going to be talking about Charles Darwin, because once again, he's our man with a plan. He's the one who came up with an excellent explanation on how evolution occurs. Because here's the thing, when people have issues with evolution, really what they have issues with is the explanation for evolution. We can't deny change over time happens. What people have issues with is the explanation. Darwin came up with our best explanation we have so far that has evidence that supports that the way life changes over time is by natural selection. And that's the key thing. He developed this theory on how evolution works. And what separates his theory from others, it presented evidence. There are evidence out there, fossil evidence that we'll talk about, homologies, analogies as well. There's genetic comparisons, looking at just morphology of organisms. And we'll talk about that in the next set of notes, but there's a lot of evidence that shows that natural selection might be this mechanism of change, that the species that are presently inhabiting our planet right now actually descended from ancestral species that existed millions of years ago, billions of years ago. Now, this is a picture that a lot of you sometimes see that kind of gives natural selection kind of a bad light or a bad misconception, because this picture pretty much tries to tell people, oh, we evolved from apes, that apes we descended from apes. And guys, this picture, it's just something that people put out there. But when Darwin spoke about monkeys, he's never mentioned that we descended from monkeys. No. When it comes to monkeys and humans, what he did say is that they're our closest relative. We didn't descend from the ape or the monkey, but when you look at our genetic comparisons, when you look at just our structures, that's probably our closest relative out there outside the human species. So once again, he proposed this mechanism called natural selection, and it's a very simple idea, something that he developed when he did his studies, and it's where a population will change over time because individuals will possess certain heritable traits. In other words, some individuals just have some characteristics, some traits that just allow them to live better. They're able to survive better than others. And if you survive, the biggest thing in natural selection, if you survive, your reward is you get to mate. And because you mate, you get to pass down those characteristics to offspring, and now they have a better chance of survival as well. A big component of his idea of natural selection is adaptation, because adaptation, guys, these are these traits, these characteristics that give organisms an edge in their environment. It gives them a little bit more of an advantage of being able to survive in specific environments. So once again, evolution, the more textbook definition is change over time in the genetic composition of a population. In other words, the change of genes, the change of alleles in a population over time. But guys, very simply, it could just be change over time. It's how life is changing over time. And it's not necessarily just life, but just how everything changes over time. It could lead to the formation of new species, and we'll talk about that. It's something called speciation. And guys, it's one of the most fundamental concepts in biology. It's kind of the concept that kind of brings everything together, that makes everything make sense. And guys, when Darwin developed this idea, guys, it was a big idea, and it challenged, and it still challenges even today, and contrasts very sharply to the traditional beliefs that were held back then, that are still held today about the earth, about how species develop, how life arose on this planet. So we'll talk about, these challenges, why he didn't publish his work right away. He actually sat on it for almost 20 years before he published his work. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that Darwin didn't just wake up one day and be like, oh, natural selection, I got it. That's the answer. There were a lot of things that came before Darwin that kind of helped them shape his idea. And it goes, the explanations to evolution go all the way back to Aristotle. Aristotle first proposed this idea called scale of nature. Now, he viewed species as unchanging, as pretty much being fixed. Now, if you're having trouble like fixed, what does that mean? Fixed just means that they don't change over time, that, someone put all this life on this planet and it's been like that forever and it hasn't been changing whatsoever. And he also thought that life could be arranged on a ladder, kind of on a scale of increasing complexity, where at the very top of the ladder, you would have humans because we're the most complex organisms. Now, his ideas, once again, coincided pretty much with that of the Old Testament. Now, Aristotle also developed a classification system, but it was very simple. He pretty much divided life into either being animals or being plants. And then in animals, he had three subcategories. Either there were land animals, there were either water animals, or there were air animals. And then for plants, he divided them into grasses, trees, and plants and brushes. So it was a very simplistic kind of classification system. It wasn't until Carlos Linnaeus comes around where he decides to kind of try to tackle classifying life, to come up with a better system, because there's some organisms that live both on land and on water, or maybe on air and land. So he developed our branch of science called taxonomy. It is the branch of biology concerned with naming and classifying organisms. And don't get it confused with taxidermy. Taxidermy is, mounting dead organisms' heads in your household. But taxonomy is the branch of biology, once again, classifying life. He also developed something called binomial nomenclature, which every organism on this planet gets a name. It gets a name called a scientific name, which is composed of two classifications he came up with called genus and species. Now, I'm hoping that your freshman year, you actually were able to go over this and kind of you remember that level of system, that classification system. It is this system right here where we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 levels of life that we classify them. We have kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Some of you maybe even have kind of a little acronym to help you memorize this, or a mnemonic device. For example, I learned it when I was in high school as kings play chess on fine green sand. But I think a lot of you might be like King Philip came over for good soup, or for good spaghetti, or for good sandwiches, or good salad. But once again, this is something that he developed, and it helps us classify life, where genus and species, once again, they come together to give us the scientific name of an organism. Notice as you go up the level, it becomes more inclusive. For example, here we would have the kingdom Animalia. It contains all animals. Phylum, we start getting more specific. This would be Chordata, all those animals with a backbone. Then we would have the next class. In this case, it's Mammalia, all those that are mammals, and so forth. So it's kind of a nested system. Now, also kind of influenced Darwin were fossils. Guys, during his time, there was an abundance of fossils being found of all this life that existed that wasn't around anymore. Dinosaurs, prehistoric life, mostly found in sedimentary rocks. Now, there's a field of biology that just covers fossils, and that's called paleontology. Paleontology is the study of fossils. It was pretty much developed by Georges Cuvier. He's pretty much known as the father of paleontology. And some things that he noted is that the deeper the strata, or the levels of the earth, the older levels of the earth, that he would find fossils, the more dissimilar the fossils were from current life. In other words, they look way completely different from the life that exists right now. He also noted that sometimes when he would go through levels of the earth, that one species would almost like completely disappear while others suddenly appear. Like on one level, maybe there's a new species, but then right below it, it's like completely different from those. So he advocated this theory called catastrophism, which are boundaries between these stratas that he proposed that maybe some huge event happened, like a huge flood, a drought, something that wiped out a lot of the life, and then afterwards kind of new life suddenly arose. Then we also have two other scientists who definitely influenced Darwin, and these were geologists. And first one is James Hutton. He proposed this idea of gradualism, that there could be a lot of change that happens through a small buildup of these continuous processes. He pretty much proposed that the Earth was changing slowly, that the Earth, first of all, was a lot older than what people were saying what it was back then. Most people thought it was only about 5,000 years old. We now know that it's over 4.5 billion years old. And the way he came up with this is that in his travels, he would look at things like valleys, canyons, like the Grand Canyon, and he noted that the rivers that are wearing these rocks away had to happen in the millions of years. It couldn't happen in
Yeah.
1,000, but it would take a long time for that to occur. So another person, Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell came up with a theory called uniformitarianism, where he pretty much incorporated what Hutton was doing, gradualism, but he also proposed that the same geological processes that are operating today operated in the past, and they're happening at the same rate. So like glaciers carving out huge valleys, mountains forming, that the things that were happening now happened millions of years ago. And both of them, once again, suggested that the Earth was more than just 6,000 years and that it was changing. Now, when Darwin was reading a lot of their books, when he was in college and he was reading books by James Hutton, Charles Lyell, who actually ends up becoming one of his best friends, he noticed that he's reading these things that are saying that the Earth is changing over time. So one idea that probably Darwin starts thinking about, well, if the Earth is changing slowly over time, then probably life is also changing slowly over time. And there's one more person that we have to kind of make sure we mention that influences Darwin, and it's Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Now, Darwin was not the first person to propose some sort of mechanism for evolution, an explanation. No, there were others that came before him. Darwin was just the first one that kind of brought it up with evidence. Now, one of the first ones, though, that kind of published something that kind of just opened the door, who was one of the first ones to kind of speak out like, hey, maybe, something else is happening, that maybe just some sort of spirit, some sort of kind of like godlike organism put all this life on here. And what he proposed is a couple things. He proposed that life was changing over time, so evolution occurs. And his explanation, he thought it was two things: this idea of use and disuse, and inheritance of acquired traits. Now, both of these don't exactly kind of work for all organisms. So therefore, he was kind of incorrect in his explanation, but we still give him credit because he's the first one to kind of put himself out there. He published something. Other scientists kind of saw him and be like, wow, if he did it, maybe I could start publishing some things as well. Now, his first idea of use and disuse was the idea that if you use part of your organism differently, you can change it, you could make it bigger, and that if you don't use part of your body, it would just fall off. Like if you don't use a limb, that it would just fall off. And at first we'd look like, well, yeah, I could lift weights and I could change my body, yeah, but it's, you can't change. Let's say I start to use my arms as wings, and I start flapping them because I want to fly. They're not going to slowly start to change into wings. So it kind of falls apart there. Also, disuse, just because you don't use part of your body, it's not going to fall off. If that were true, then all of you here probably wouldn't have a brain. Oh, yes, I'm just kidding. No, all of you, I'm sure, use your brain. Now, also, there's this idea of inheritance of acquired traits that he came up with, that if you inherit a trait during your lifetime, that you could pass it down to your offspring. For example, let's say today you decide, you know what, this distance learning isn't working for me. You drop out of school and you just decide to hit the gym, and you're just going to get all buff, you're going to get all ripped, and you find a significant other that's doing the same thing. So both of you are ripped and you decide to have an offspring. That offspring's not going to be born all ripped and all, shiny with baby oil all over it and be all nice and ripped. No, if that baby wants to be ripped like the parents, they're going to have to work at it. So they're not going to acquire suddenly all these big muscles. So that's where kind of his theories kind of fall apart. But once again, we give him credit for just being the first person to kind of put themselves out there. Then one last person that definitely influenced Darwin was Thomas Malthus. Now, he wasn't a scientist per se, he was an economist. And he was an economist that was studying human population. And he was writing books about how the human population was increasing way too fast, even back then, that we would eventually run out of supplies, that supplies for resources weren't increasing as fast as the population was. So he thought that eventually what's going to happen, we're going to have insufficient space and not enough food, and that would start to limit the population. Things like disease, war, famine would start to happen more often and would start to limit how big a population can get. So he was mentioning how, only those organisms, those humans that can maybe get these food that could get this space would be able to survive. So when Darwin starts reading this, I think in his mind, he starts coming up with something we equate to Darwin, which is survival of the fittest, where it's this idea that, yeah, those organisms that can get those resources, like maybe get that food, that water, maybe get that space, those mates as well, they're going to be able to survive better than others and pass down these traits that maybe allow them to get these things a lot easier. And then finally, we come back to Darwin. Once again, that's a man with a plan. Born in 1809 in England. He went to medical school, but he actually left after 1 year of medical school. His dad was a doctor, so his dad wanted him to be a doctor as well. But he went in for a year and he dropped out. He actually didn't even tell his father right away, because that was his father's kind of dream, that his son would kind of follow in his father's footsteps. But there was an interesting story that he wrote down in his memoir, that, it was the 3rd week of medical school and they had to see open surgery. And the surgery he had to watch was of a little girl getting about 8 years old, having to get her leg amputated. So he writes very vividly that he remembers that surgery, like he could remember, the girl screaming, because back then they didn't really have good anesthesia. So he could, he remembers kind of the sawing of the bone and the screams and just the amount of blood. So he was like, that's it, this is not for me. So instead, he always took an interest in botany and zoology. So he gets a bachelor's in botany. And he kind of makes his name for himself a little bit with his graduate advisors. His graduate advisors end up kind of seeing that, wow, he's talented. He has a really good eye for observations and for research. So, but for Darwin, his dream was that he always wanted to make his dad proud. And he always felt like he let down his dad because he didn't become a doctor. So, he talks to one of his professors, and his professor tells him, if you want to make your name for yourself, you have to go out there. You have to go do some research. You have to come up with a new idea. You have to go discover some fossils, something a lot of scientists were doing back then. So his graduate advisor tells him, look, I have a place for you. You could be the ship's naturalist. There's this ship going out, the HMS Beagle. It's going out to South America. You could be that ship's naturalist. Back then, a naturalist would be carried in every ship to collect fossils, to kind of do research, kind of also kind of describe the life that existed in these lands that they were going to. So he gets all excited. He's about 22 years old. So he goes and he tells his dad, Dad, I want to go on this ship. I want to be the naturalist of this ship. He's excited. And his dad says, no, sorry, you're not going to go. So Darwin's freaking out. It's like, why not? It's like, no, he had another son, but his other son had passed away. So Darwin was his only son. And he's like, no, I'm not going to let you go. You're my only son. These ships sail. They never come back. There's things that could go wrong. I'm not going to lose my only son. So he's trying to figure out a way to convince his father to let him go. So he knows that the only person that could convince his dad is his uncle. So he goes and he talks to his uncle and he goes, you got to talk to my dad. You got to let him go. You got to talk to him and let him know he has to let me go. So the uncle looks at Darwin and he's like, you know what? I could talk to your dad and I could convince him to let you go, but you have to promise me one thing. When you get back, you have to promise me this one thing. And Darwin's like, yes, what do you want? I'll do anything. When you come back, you have to marry my daughter. And he's like, what? And yes, guys, that means his cousin Emma. So Darwin's like, no, that's gross. I don't want to marry my cousin. So the uncle's like, I guess I'm not talking to your dad. So Darwin's like, you know what? Fine, I'll do it. I'll marry Emma. So he gets to go on his voyage. Guys, what was supposed to be a 1-year voyage ends up being 5 years. And guys, he sees things that, once again, were just blowing his staff. By the way, this is Charles Darwin. This was his father. This is the HMS Beagle. We'll talk about this book a little bit later. But guys, they go for 5 years. And what's funny, Darwin suffers from seasickness. He's all sick all over the ship. They go to South America, and that's kind of the main place that they kind of stay. Just kind of their job was to kind of make maps of the coastline of South America. So as soon as they get to South America, Darwin actually jumps off ship. I mean, he stays on land while the captain of the ship just goes back and forth. They also visit the very famous Galapagos Islands. They go to Australia. They also go to Africa as well. And guys, remember, Darwin, up to this point, only knew things like cows and sheep and goats because that's what they had in England. Guys, he was being blown away. He described it as a blind man suddenly being given the given sight. He was looking at things like blue-footed boobies, giant tortoises, different fishes as well, iguanas, kimono dragons, once again, dolphins, sharks, all these things that he had never seen before. Now, Darwin, very funny guy. So he comes back, and you would think it's like, okay, I'm here. This is a picture of Emma. He comes back after 5 years. He's thinking, you know what? Emma's probably already married. She probably didn't wait for me. He gets back 5 years. Emma's like, hey, where you've been, it's time to get married. And he's like, oh, I still don't want to do this. And actually, one thing, guys, the uncle, Emma's father, his last name was Wedgwood. And guys, Wedgwood is a company you might be familiar with, maybe not yet, but you may be in the future. Because guys, if you get lucky enough to maybe get a significant other later on in life and you get married, one of the things you have to do is you have some sort of wedding, and your participants in the wedding usually buy you gifts. And before they buy you gifts, you go register somewhere like at Bed Bath & Beyond or Macy's or something for things that you want. And for some reason, something that you register for is China. And I don't know why, because we tend to never use it. I'm sure you probably, your parents maybe have China that you've maybe only used once or twice, or maybe never at all. I remember when I got married, we got China as well. And, I thought this was boring. I was like, I went to the store, we were at Macy's, and, my wife was showing me all these China patterns. And I was like, I don't care, until she showed me one. Because here's the thing, Emma's last name, her uncle's last name is Wedgwood. And Wedgwood is a fine maker of china. So Wedgwood China, when I saw it and I flipped it back and I saw Wedgwood, I was like, oh, wow, that's actually Darwin's wife's name. That's like, well, this company, and it still exists today. So actually, you know what? I want to show you this right here. So there's, I don't know if you guys see it. That's my china right there, Wedgwood. Kind of a cool pattern. I can help that out. So kind of a cool story there, but let me continue to share my PowerPoint. So once again, he gets back. Darwin makes a list on reasons why he should marry Emma or not. And guys, this list, I don't know if you've seen it, it's hilarious. Reasons not to marry: freedom to go where one likes, choice of society and live above it, conversation with clever men at clubs. That's kind of an entertaining one. Not forced to visit relatives or bend to their trifles, to their every trifles. To have the expense and anxiety of children, perhaps quarreling. Loss of time, cannot read in the evenings, fatness and idleness, anxiety and responsibility, less money for books. So just funny. And his reasons to marry, notice here: children, if it pleases God, constant companionship, object to be loved and be played with, house and someone to take care of house, charms of music and female chit-chat. These things are good for one's health, better than a dog anyhow. Oh, that's harsh. Notice a lot more reasons not to marry, but you know what? He ends up marrying Emma, and guys, he loves Emma. They have end up having 12 children. He loves his wife just immensely. So he comes back, guys. Sorry, 20 years. He actually doesn't even publish anything. It takes him 20 years to go over. He collects thousands of fossils, has over hundreds of books that he writes, drawings, sketches, observations. But what he comes up with is this idea of natural selection. That no matter what population he studied, population of finches, population of iguanas, population of turtles, that no matter the population, there's always variation. There's always differences in the population that enable some to survive and reproduce better than others. And those that survive and reproduce, they pass the variations down to their offspring, and they have a better chance of survival. Those that don't survive, they don't reproduce, they don't pass their genes down. And he termed this natural selection. Now, he doesn't publish it right away. It takes him 20 years. And one of the reasons is that, guys, he's scared. here's the thing, by the time he gets back to England, he's been sending fossils, and we'll look at some of these fossils he found a little bit later, like a fossil of an armadillo that's like 6 feet tall, 8 feet in length, a giant armadillo, a giant sloth as well. He had pretty much made a name for himself. He gets a professorship at Cambridge. You know, his father is all happy. He's like a well-known, respected individual, scientist. And he doesn't want to publish it because he could lose all that, because he doesn't know how the public's going to take this book. Because this book is going to challenge the ideas people had at that time. So it wasn't until after a little bit of convincing by Charles Lyell, who we mentioned before, that had the idea of uniformitarianism, and a little bit of competition from someone named Alfred Russel Wallace, which I'll talk a little bit about later, that also developed a theory very similar to Darwin. In 1959, he finally published his book, and guys, it changes the world. This book changes the world. And once again, this book brings up this idea. Now, the part that people have an issue with is this idea of descent with modification. In there, he puts natural selection, but also this idea that there's all unity in life, that all organisms on this planet are kind of related to each other through descent from an ancestor that lived millions, billions of years ago. And as descendants of these ancestral species, as we went into different habitats over millions of years, we started to change slowly over time. We started to accumulate different modifications, different adaptations to these different habitats that helped us kind of fit and be successful. And we started to speciate, become all these different species over billions and millions of years. So that's the idea people have an issue with, this shared common ancestor, that we're all related when it comes to living organisms. And here's an example of descent with modification. For example, right now, there are 2 species of elephants. We have the African elephant and we have the Asian elephant. But guys, we have found fossils, some ice fossils, some other just more kind of molds and casts of elephants that existed in the past. So we have this idea of descent with modification, with the last one being the woolly mammoth that became extinct about 10,000 years ago when the Ice Age was happening. You notice it had a lot of fur to help it live during that time. And actually, we might have to adjust this pretty soon, because guys, they're in the process right now trying to actually clone the woolly mammoth, which we'll talk a little bit later when we cover biotechnology. So, guys, when it comes to Darwin, once again, he perceived this idea of natural selection, that there's always a struggle for existence, that organisms tend to over-reproduce, they tend to have lots of offspring. Not really true for some mammals, like humans, we usually don't. But like if you look at cats and dogs, they have their offspring, their litters, they usually have 8, 9, 6, 5. Usually because some of these might not make it, because, you know, they're trying to have a lot of offspring to see if some of those will have these favorable traits, these adaptations that will help them survive, reproduce, and then pass those down to their offspring. Okay, so this is going to be my stopping point. I'm going to cut this. It's a long PowerPoint, and I don't want to keep these videos being too long, because I want to make sure that I don't lose your attention. So up to this point, that's what I want to cover. And guys, on that evolution problem set, knowing these scientists and what they brought to the table to help influence Darwin is something I need you to make sure that you go back and review. And hopefully our conversation today kind of went over that. So at this time, do you guys have any questions, any concerns? And once again, you could put it on the chat, or you could just unmute yourself and ask the question.
Can you hear me, Mr. V?
Yes.
I had a question about problem 9 on the evolution problem set.
Okay, do you have that problem set?
Yeah, do you want me to read it to you?
Yes.
The problem is, which of these conditions are always true of populations evolving due to natural selection? Condition, do you want me to keep reading, or do you?
No, let me actually look at that real quick and see. So I'm just going to pull that up in a second. Okay, so I'm going to share that question so people can see it real quick. Okay, so it's this question right here, guys, number 9. So it says, which of these conditions are always true of the populations evolving due to natural selection? So before I answer it or give you some idea, what do you guys think so far? Like, what would your best guess be or best hypothesis?
Or where I got stuck was I know condition true must be true. Condition 2 must be true, excuse me.
Yes.
But I was confused on condition 3. Because
Well,
it says,
go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say because individuals pass on most traits they acquire during their lifetime, and where I was confused was like, is it incorrect because it's saying that you acquire traits while you're alive?
Yes.
That's what. Okay.
So in other words, that should not be an option because condition 3 is mostly kind of looking at Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. That's a Lamarckian theory, which was incorrect. Because once again, let's say you acquire a scar. That's a trait that now you have in your lifetime. If you have children, your children aren't going to be born with that scar. So in this case, it would be really just conditions 1 and 2. There has to be variation when it comes to the population must vary in the traits. Guys, no variation, you're not going to have change over time. There has to be variation. And then, yeah, there has to be some traits that just allow some some of those organisms in that species to reproduce better than others. Okay, so any other questions?
Could you go over problem 13?
Problem 13. Let me see if I could bring that back up. All right, let me see. Problem 13, let me just see if I can move this. It says, given a population that contains genetic variation, what is the correct sequence of the following events under the influence of natural selection? So notice you have a couple choices. Which one of these would probably have to be the first one? Which one would you place as possibly being the first one?
2.
2. There has to be some sort of change occurs in the environment. So I would put 2 first for sure. Then next one would probably be which one? So this is where it could be. So
4.
4, poorly adapted individuals have decreased survivalship. Yes.
It could be either 1 or 4.
Yeah, it could be 1 because 1 could also well-adapted individual leave more offspring. And then the last one, though, should be 3. Genetic frequencies within the population will change because once this happens, so in that case, our answer that best fits this, so if we're going 2, it'd probably be A, 2, 4, 1, and 3.
Oh, I have an unrelated question. Do you
Yes.
have any idea how we're going to start turning these in?
Yes, tomorrow I'll give those details. Just to give you a preview, what you'll do is you'll take a picture or you'll scan your assignments, and then you're gonna submit them on Edmodo. I'm gonna make a post for every period, and then you'll just add it as an attachment, and that will help me organize my work by period.
So that's going to be like on the post, not a direct message to you?
No, not a direct message, on a post, and I'm not gonna set these posts yet. I'll let you know tomorrow exactly when I'm gonna open up those posts, so you can start submitting your work. Now, guys, I do have actually a challenge for you, a little fun challenge. You know, I want to make it a little bit interesting. I'm going to pull up a challenge real quick for you guys, and I'm going to show you something. Guys, here's your challenge. Can you solve this puzzle? Can you see what I'm showing you? Hopefully you do. Guys, solve this puzzle, and the first, you know what, let's go first 10 people who put it on the Snapchat, I will, on the chat feature, I will give credit to. Maybe give some extra credit.
I don't see anything yet. I can't see it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
You can't see anything? Okay, let me share. Let me just.
Do we get credit if we shout it out, Mr. V, instead of having to type?
No, don't shout it out. Let me see if I could pull that real quick. You guys see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's one of our little fun challenge. So see if you could put it. Actually, don't put it on the chat. You know what? Here's the thing. You know what? Put it on your assignment. Put it on the evolution assignment at the very bottom. And if you put the answer in there, I'll give you some extra credit if that's even allowed during this time.
Wait, put it where? I'm sorry, you cut out.
At the bottom of the evolution problem set. So you could put it at the bottom of your evolution problem set, and when you turn that in, I'll see it and give it maybe a little extra. And try to keep this on the down low, maybe just between us and you guys, and don't spread it out to everybody. It should be a nice little reward for those of you who could do the Zoom, who will watch it later, possibly on a recording. Okay, so do you guys have it? Can I stop my share? And once again, I am recording this, so you'll see it on later on today on Edmodo when I put this on there. Someone said that was easy. I think it was easy. I feel like I should have picked a harder one. Someone asked, isn't there domain? Yes, guys, there is a bigger classification now. I didn't mention it because that wasn't something Carlos Linnaeus developed. His was kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. But now there is a bigger one called domain. There are 3 domains. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later when we talk about phylogeny and classograms.
Mr. V,
Yes.
for the evolution worksheet, would that be like a good study guide for the quiz?
I think so. The evolution problem set, the notes also would be very good as well. And then maybe going back and just looking at those scientists and what they brought to the table. You could read little parts of your textbook online. Tomorrow, guys, I'm going to try to have 2 Zoom sessions. One at 10 a.m. I apologize for the morning sessions. They've been canceling because we've been having faculty meetings, dual credit meetings during that time. But I'm hoping to have one in the morning and then hopefully another one in the afternoon. And I'll finish this set of notes tomorrow. I'll finish this one and then on Friday, talk about the evidence for evolution. So once again, tomorrow we'll have a 10 a.m. and a 2 p.m. Once again, they're mirror images of each other or just they're copies of each other, so you don't have to attend both. The Khan Academy lesson is already posted. Oh, look, it's my son Darwin. Darwin, no, this is Lucas. So yes, it's already there. If you don't see it populated, what I have to do is on Khan Academy, I'll go and update it because I think maybe some of you have joined in a little bit late after I've assigned them. So I'll go today and I'll add any students who maybe haven't been added, but you should see 2 assignments if you've joined the AP Classroom, the Khan Academy classroom. I'll make sure and update that today. So there should be 2. There should be one on evolution and natural selection. I think it's called natural selection. Someone asked, the quiz will be over these notes and genetic. Yes, it'll be over evolution and genetic linkage as well. Okay, guys, well, I think we're hitting the 45-minute mark. So I think this brings an end to our meeting, guys. If you are done, you could leave the meeting. Guys, if you want to stay behind, I'll stay on for 2 more minutes and maybe answer any questions you might have.